This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I would like to bust a myth about saltwater pools and the fact that they are low maintenance or maintenance-free pools. A lot of times you're going to hear this from someone selling a system at a store, that the saltwater pool system will allow you to have a hands-off, maintenance-free experience. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy coaching program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. It is true that in some ways a saltwater generator makes your pool care a little bit easier. Some may argue that it makes it harder, and I agree with both. I'm kind of down the middle on this. I think there is some advantages to it, and there are, of course, disadvantages to a saltwater pool. I think a lot of pool pros are kind of jaded on saltwater systems because a lot of homeowners that inherit the pool that has a saltwater system, or some may have been sold the system and don't want to purchase a new salt cell when they need to or fix the system. And then you're kind of left with a pool with a lot of salt in the water, and it's a chlorine pool at that point where you switch over to tablets and liquid chlorine. And so a lot of pool pros don't like saltwater systems for that reason, that the customer doesn't want to maintain them or get a new cell, which defeats the whole purpose of a saltwater generator. So I get it. I understand that. I've had many pools where the customer just doesn't want to address the issues of the saltwater system, and then we return the pool to a chlorine pool, and all that salt in the water does make a mess because the total dissolved solids, or TDS, is really high in the pool. Sometimes it has no effect, other times it does become a problem. And this is a real issue out there if you have a pool service company, those saltwater pool generators that just are not operational. So what is a saltwater pool? Well, a saltwater pool is a chlorine pool. So a lot of times when you're getting a salt system, the salesperson may be pushing it as a saltwater pool. It's kind of like, in the ocean where you don't have to worry about anything. Well, at least the Pacific Ocean is not too pretty, so I wouldn't compare it to the Pacific Ocean, but yeah, I would definitely compare it somewhere like Cancun or somewhere like that where the water is really clear and really no maintenance is required. But you do need to maintain your pool. It is a chlorine pool. Basically, the salt system uses electrolysis to convert the salt into chlorine gas, which is a pure form of chlorine, but you still need to manage the pool, and sometimes you have to manage the chlorine levels even more than in a regular pool. You still need to balance the pH, and if you have a saltwater pool or if you have them on your pool route, you know that the pH tends to rise really fast in a saltwater pool, and that's because the byproduct of the salt cell is sodium hydroxide, which raises the pH. Plus, there's a lot of turbidity in the saltwater system in the cell itself, and some cells, of course, have more than others, and this causes the pH to rise as well. So there's a lot of things you have to be aware of with a saltwater pool that you're adding to the pool, and you still have to balance the pH, alkalinity, the calcium hardness. Of course, your cyanuric acid level has to be within range, and I'll go over that range in a little bit. And of course, the salt level, and then all of this goes into the LSI to balance the water so that it's not scale forming or corrosive. You also have to maintain the salt cell. Some areas you get more calcium buildup than others, and the salt cell needs regular cleaning in a lot of cases. Along with that, you have to adjust the pool runtime and the salt cell output so you can make sure you're having enough chlorine created or made each day to maintain a good free chlorine level in the pool. And you also have to maintain the salt level between 3,000 and 3,500 parts per million, because if it goes over that, anywhere from 4,000 parts per million or higher, salt is corrosive. And if you have soft stone coping or a deck, or if you have, a heater, a very high salt level can be corrosive. And you have to also monitor the power unit itself to make sure that it's functioning. So as you can see for this first part of the talk, there is a lot of maintenance with a saltwater system. And if you go to purchase one and the salesperson tells you that this will make your pool maintenance easier, again, I'm divided on this. I think there is some things that the saltwater system makes easier, but as you can see, there's a lot more maintenance involved in a saltwater system because it is another part of your equipment pad now, and it's another piece of equipment you have to monitor and make sure is in working order. Now, I mentioned the chlorine level, and I'll talk about the cyanuric acid at the same time here. One of the things with a saltwater system, if you have one, or if you have operational salt systems on your pool route, you'll know that adjusting the chlorine level sometimes can be difficult. One of the things that the saltwater generator does well is it generates chlorine at a high level, and sometimes you have too much chlorine going into the pool. This is more of a common problem than having too little chlorine in most cases, although that can happen as well. So adjusting the system once it's put into the pool is also something that needs some fine-tuning. It takes me about 2 or 3 weeks out there to adjust the saltwater system properly for the pool. I'm pretty good at it, but sometimes, it does take a little bit of work to get the output set. You have ways of controlling the output of a salt system. So basically every system will let you adjust how much output the salt cell puts out from 100% as low as 5% or 10%, depending on the system. Sometimes you even go to 2 or 3%, which is nice, but no one needs that little of production. Most of the time, the sweet spot is about 50% production, and how long you run your pool pump. If you have a variable speed pump, at what RPM do you run it at to get the maximum production set at an output that's going to be desirable for your saltwater system. So right there, it's a little complicated with the variable speed pump because it runs at different RPMs and the flow is a little bit different, and you want to make sure you have enough output so you're producing enough chlorine in the pool. That's when you find that you're producing too little chlorine if you're running the VS pump at a lower speed, or you have too low of an output on the saltwater system. It tends to produce less chlorine. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that cyanuric acid is kind of a necessary evil in the pool industry. What I mean by that is that it does protect the chlorine from being burned off or used up by the sun's UV rays rapidly, and this is even more relevant in a saltwater pool. Now, Bob Lowry explains it this way, and I think it's logical. Since your pool has fewer return lines, let's say your pool has 3 return lines, and the saltwater generator is making chlorine, and then it's shooting it out of those return lines, there's a huge amount of concentrated chlorine coming out of the return lines into the pool, which means that if you don't have the right cyanuric acid level, the sun's UV rays will destroy most of that before it actually gets around and circulates in the pool. And so the theory, well, actually I'll back up a little bit. When they first came out, there was a prevalent myth, and this was even propagated by the major manufacturers. And I distinctly remember calling Pentair and talking to a tech there, and I was asking about the saltwater generator. It was fairly new to me. I didn't know a lot about him. It was one of my first saltwater pools. And I asked him, what about the cyanuric acid? He goes, oh, that's the beauty of saltwater pools. You don't need any cyanuric acid because it's continuously producing chlorine. Well, we know that's a myth because you do need cyanuric acid for any kind of chlorine product in the pool, outdoor pool, that's not indoors. Now, here's the difference. If you have an indoor pool, there's no UV rays hitting the pool, or not as extensively. Most of the time, you're indoors and there's nothing hitting it from the outdoors. And so basically, the pool doesn't, you don't have to worry too much about the chlorine being destroyed by the UV rays. But an outdoor pool, you definitely need it. And so that definitely is not something that is true today, because you do need cyanuric acid, and you need more cyanuric acid than a regular chlorine pool if you're using liquid chlorine or cal hypo or tablets. Of course, if you're using trichlor tablets, the cyanuric acid level will rise pretty rapidly in your pool over the season. But the saltwater pool does need more cyanuric acid because the chlorine is more concentrated coming out of the return jets, which means it's more concentrated, and you need a higher cyanuric acid level to protect that concentrated chlorine. So the theory today, and I'm going to stick with it because I think it's true, is that a cyanuric acid level of 80 parts per million is good for a saltwater pool. It'll protect the chlorine as it's being produced, and it'll allow it to last in the pool and protect it from the sun's UV rays. Now let me talk about the maintenance part of a saltwater system. And again, if you're going to purchase one of these, I think that they do serve a good purpose because they do inject chlorine into your pool continuously while it's running, if it's running properly, and that eliminates one factor, which is adding chlorine to the pool. I'll touch on the pH as well in a minute, but as far as maintenance goes, some areas require more maintenance than others. What I mean by this is that there's some areas where really there's no calcium being built up on the salt cell because the water is not hard in those areas. Now, in my area of Los Angeles County, the water is extremely hard. We have well water, and all of my faucets in my house are clogged up. My shower head gets clogged up. There's a ring in my toilet. And of course, the calcium hardness level is much higher coming out of the tap here in my area. So we have very hard water. What this means is that the salt plates will get a lot of calcium buildup, which will require continuous maintenance. There are some areas in Los Angeles County where you're cleaning the salt cells once a month because there's so much calcium buildup on the cells, on the cell plates. And this is kind of like my area. I clean my salt cell probably every 3 months, and the salt cells on my route have to be cleaned regularly as well for that reason. So that's the maintenance. You got to make sure that the plates are free of calcium because of the fact that once the plates get covered in calcium, they don't conduct electricity properly, and you're not producing chlorine at all, or maybe at a very low level. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind. The other thing you have to also keep in mind is that in the wintertime, or when the water gets cold, here in my area, when it gets into the 60s, the saltwater generator does not work because cold water does not conduct electricity well, or in cold water, you can't conduct electricity well, and the salt cell stops producing. So in those cold weather months, you have to switch over to chlorine. I like to use a floater with a trichlor tablet, and that way I'm introducing some cyanuric acid into the pool in the winter. And by the time summertime gets here, my cyanuric acid level in the pools, the saltwater pools, should be around 80 parts per million, using 1 tablet a month or maybe 2 tablets a month in the wintertime to kind of extend the chlorine, or keep the chlorine in the pool, I should say, and add cyanuric acid as well. Now, as far as the pH goes, yes, the pH rises very rapidly in a saltwater pool. I find this to be exasperated with a brand new pool. So if the pool has just been plastered and you have a saltwater generator, the pH is uncontrollable in a lot of cases where you're at 8.2, 8.4 because of the fact that as a byproduct of the saltwater generator, the pH rises in the pool, sometimes extremely rapidly to where you can't control it even with muriatic acid. One way to counter this in a saltwater pool, and is something that's pretty effective in my testing, is again, the output should be at 50% if you can manage it that way. You also want to keep the alkalinity at around 80 parts per million. That really helps with the pH bounce because alkalinity is a buffer, and if it's lower, the pH tends not to rise as rapidly. And another thing you can do is add borates to the pool at 50 parts per million, and borates is a pH buffer. And so with the borates in the water, it's going to slow down the pH rising in the pool. Just note that with borates at 50 parts per million, it's going to take a little bit more muriatic acid to lower the pH in that pool because, again, you have your alkalinity at 80, you have borates at 50 parts per million, and it's going to take a little bit more muriatic acid to kind of bring that pH back down. But you'll find that if it's not a new build the first year, and if it's just a regular pool that has been built and has a saltwater generator and the pool's older, you'll find that the pH will be pretty stable with borates at 50 parts per million and your alkalinity at 80. As long as you don't have a lot of water features going, you're going to find that the pH stabilizes at about 7.8 and it stays there most of the week, you probably won't get the pH to stabilize at 7.2 or 7.4. That's more akin to pools that are using trichlor tablets because the trichlor has a low pH of like 3, and so you're lowering the pH with the tablets as well. And usually you'll find that in the trichlor pool or pool using tablets, the pH is pretty stable at about 7.4. But in a saltwater pool, you're good if you can get it to 7.8 and you can stabilize it at that point. But you are going to be fighting rising pH in a saltwater pool. So there may be more maintenance because you're adding more acid and you have to be careful and balance your pool more so than if you were using trichlor tablets, because again, the pH is much more stable in a pool using trichlor because the tablets are actually releasing cyanuric acid into the pool as well as chlorine, and that's lowering the pH or keeping it fairly stable. So a lot of complaints you do get from someone using trichlor tablets in their pool and they go to a saltwater generator is that, hey, I never had to really add acid to my pool, and now I'm adding like a gallon every 2 weeks. It's crazy. And that's the truth behind a saltwater pool, is that the pH is rising rapidly and you have to add more muriatic acid to lower down the pH in the pool. So the bottom line is the saltwater pool does have a great benefit. It adds chlorine to your pool, so it takes that out of the equation. You won't need to go to the store and buy liquid chlorine or cal hypo during the summer to shock your pool. And the shocking goes away basically because you have a pretty steady free chlorine level in the pool week to week if you have the saltwater generator set up correctly. And it also will reduce the amount of algae in the pool automatically because you have a steady free chlorine amount in the pool, and it really never gets to zero in most cases if the saltwater generator is set correctly. The only time you would ever have to shock the pool is if you had a big pool party, the saltwater generator can't keep up with it or can't make enough chlorine the rest of the week to kind of break the combined chlorine that's in the water, then you may need to add some liquid chlorine to the pool. But in most cases, the saltwater pool is chlorine-free maintenance in a lot of ways because it's creating the chlorine and injecting it into the pool, taking, again, that out of the equation. But then you're adding a rising pH into the equation, which means you have to spend more time on that end of the spectrum, adjusting the pH and controlling the pH and not worrying about the chlorine. And I'll close with one part of this myth, and you'll get this from people that are selling the systems to customers that aren't aware of certain things, and people, of course, buy into this, that it's going to save you money over chlorine. Now, maybe it will save you some money during the season on chlorine, and it may look like you're saving money because you're not adding chlorine to the pool. You're not buying a bucket of tablets for $200. You're not buying liquid chlorine or cal hypo during the season. But you have to think about it this way. The unit itself has a cost. If you're getting a new build, it's already built into the cost. You're not going to feel that. So in a way, you are saving money because you've already paid for it in the pool build. But if you're having one added afterwards, you have to calculate the cost of the unit. And then the salt cell is a finite part of the equipment, which means that it has a lifespan. Most have a lifespan of 10,000 hours of use. And then you have to buy a new salt cell. These can range anywhere from $500 to over $1,000 for the salt cell. So all the savings that you have received from saving on chlorine, you're actually going to pay back with a new cell. And also, I mentioned the rising pH. Muriatic acid is no longer cheap. It's really expensive, and it's something that you're going to have to understand. I just, wholesale, a case of acid costs me a little over $30 for 4 gallons of it. And, retail is much higher than that. And this is actually really good muriatic acid, 31.45%. And so muriatic acid is not inexpensive any longer. And that's the cost that you're going to have to put into the equation with a saltwater generator. So the bottom line, it does not save you money. It may actually be a more expensive way to operate your pool. But it is something to consider if you want to eliminate the chlorine from the equation, and you can live with all the other things that go with the saltwater pool. And the myth that it's a low maintenance way to run your pool or manage your pool is just that. It's a myth. If you're looking for other podcasts I've recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. And if you click on the podcast icon on the banner, There'll be a drop-down menu of over 1,600 podcasts for you there. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.